Good afternoon and welcome to the Fireside Chat here at the Gibson Museum and Cultural Center. We're very excited to have with us a longtime Lake County resident, Ed Robey, who happens to be involved in a number of agencies and has elected positions and appointed positions over the past 35, 40 years. So, yes, because that's how long I've known Ed.
Yeah, and you were the cause of part of that.
I was the cause of part of it. I'm Boris Brumfield, and I'm the president of the Friends of the Gibson Museum and Cultural Center. Right now we have with us, also part of the Gibson board, we have Janet Klein, who is the secretary of the Friends of the Gibson and South Lake County Historical Association. We have with us the accessioner for the registrar for the county museum system, and that's Maria Raphael. The county has 3 actual museums that they operate. County of Lake operates 3 museums. The first was the Courthouse Museum in Lakeport. It was the old Lake County Courthouse until they built the new courthouse across the street, and that became a museum. Then the second one was the Lower Lake Schoolhouse Museum that Ed was fairly familiar with over the years. And then the newest kid on the block is the Gibson Museum and Cultural Center, which used to be the library for Middletown. Well, we have with us today Ed Robey, who is going to talk to us about his history in Lake County and specifically land development, because Ed served on the Lake County Planning Commission for how many years?
8 years.
8 years on the Planning Commission.
Boris is the one who appointed me.
Originally. But before that, you were the mayor of the city of Clear Lake also.
That's true.
And yeah, and then after that, he was on the Lake County Board of Supervisors representing this district, as well as Lower Lake and Clear Lake for
12 years.
Only 12 years. He only did that for 12. And now, are you still president of the, not Audubon?
Sierra Club.
Sierra Club.
No, actually, I got Denise Rushing to take over that.
Right. So Ed was president of the Sierra Club, but now you're just on their board?
Yeah.
You're just serves on their board. And we are thrilled to have his wisdom and his insight and his jolly good spirit with us today. Ed Robey.
Thank you, Boris. What an introduction. I don't have a prepared talk, so I was told I could just talk about whatever. And so I know you want me to talk a little about my history and about myself, but if anyone has anything in particular they'd like me to talk about, I'd be glad to do that. I actually was not born in Lake County, but my parents, I was born in Oakland, but we had a little summer cabin up here that my grandfather built, and it still exists. My baby handprints are in the heart of the fireplace. And so my mom would bring my brothers and I up during summer vacation. So I've been here every summer since I was born, but didn't move up here full-time until I was about 11. And I'll be 73 in 3 weeks. So I've been here a while. Yeah, I got involved in my local community back in the day when the city of Clear Lake incorporated. They incorporated in 1980, and it was the 3rd time that the city, there were 2 little towns, Clear Lake Park and Clear Lake Highlands, and they felt that the county wasn't really providing adequate services. You know, they were paying their property taxes and everything, but the streets were falling apart. There was hardly any sheriff patrol and so on and so forth. And so they figured it would be better if they became a city and tried to have their own law enforcement and roads and so on and so forth. And the 3rd time it passed in 1980. And I was one of the 5 people that got elected to the original city council. And it was a very interesting time because of all of my political involvement since then, that was the only time I've ever seen it where we never had any time to argue about anything. There were no really disputes or debates. We were so busy just trying to figure out how to get it together. It was something because the election passed in November and we had till the following July 1st to put together a city from scratch.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was something else. You know, we had to make all these decisions. I'll give you an example. We were trying to figure out what to do about law enforcement. And so we asked the sheriff to come down and make a presentation to the council to tell us what he would charge us to provide law enforcement for the city. And the sheriff came down and very nicely told us that he'd provide us with basically the same level of protection that we had right now for $1 million a year. And we looked around and said, heck, that's why we incorporated, or at least one of the reasons. For $1 million a year, we could do our own. So that's what we decided to do. And then, anyway, I'm just saying, I've been through a lot around here, and I love Lake County. It's my home. And I'm glad to be a part of the community. It's a very interesting place. It's very alive and special. And, you know, we're kind of off the beaten track. A lot of people don't even know where we are. Mm-hmm. But in a way, that's good. We've been protected from a lot of the crazy stuff that's gone on in the more urban areas. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad to be here.
How long did the city exist before there was a successful recall? Because they tried to disincorporate the city for a very long time.
Oh yeah.
There was a group.
Okay, we'll talk about some city history. Yeah, okay. So, when we first got elected, some of us got 2-year terms and some of us got 4-year terms, so that the council wouldn't all be re-elected at one time. It would rotate. And I'll get to your question. But
it's related to the city too.
okay, so I got sidetracked.
So you were on staggered terms.
Well, yeah, but I'm trying to get to the recall. So what happened was there were some people who didn't like the idea of being a city. They said, we don't want to be a city. We came up here to get out of the city.
Yeah, you did appreciate that. Yeah.
So they decided to disincorporate. And the disincorporation movement was interesting because what they discovered was it's the same process to disincorporate a city as it is to incorporate a city. You have to go through this legal process and you have to go through an agency. Every county has an agency that hardly anybody's ever heard of called LAFCO, LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission. And I still sit on LAFCO. I'm the public member.
Cool.
But anyway, so the disincorporation folks had a big public hearing at LAFCO trying to make their pitch of why the city should be disincorporated. And I remember very clearly getting into a debate with Gary Lambert, who was one of the county supervisors serving on LAFCO. And Gary and I had gone to high school together. You know, we'd known each other since we were kids. And I told Gary, I said, listen, man, just drive up Glasgow Grade and turn right on Point Lakeview Road and stop your car and, you know, at night and look across. And you tell me whether that's a city or not. Because if you do that, you'll see all the lights and you'll realize that there's a whole bunch of people there. You know, 15,000 roughly people. So it didn't pass through LAFCO. And so they got very upset about that. And they decided that they were going to recall the city council, you know, and get their own people in there. And so they decided to recall. There were, at the original city council, there were 5 of us. There was one woman, Doris Logatetta, and then 4 men. And they decided that they were going to recall 3 of the men, but not me and not Doris. So they had a big town meeting at the lodge, and they were telling everybody about how the people on the city council were spending way too much money. Boy, if they only knew what things cost nowadays, that, you know, we were paying, you know, our city manager $50,000 a year. Now it's way over 100. Anyway, but we were, you know, extravagant spenders and all this stuff. So then they decided to take public input from the audience, and I jumped up. I'd heard enough. And I did something that I've never done quite since. I sort of lost it. But I told them, I said, you know, I said, this is nuts. I said, you know, if you don't like what they're doing, run for the city council yourself, or get some of your friends to run. This recall thing, it's going to be divisive, it's going to be expensive, it's going to set the city back 10 years. It really doesn't make any sense, you know. These people, I've worked with them, and I don't agree with everything they're doing, and I don't, but they're not doing anything illegal, and they're not doing anything wrong, you know, they're just doing what they think is right, you know. And so I don't have any problem with these people. If you want to recall them, recall me too. No kidding, I actually, and it's probably one of the dumbest things I ever said in my life. But they did. They went and added me to the petition. And they had all these, they had a list of things they were accusing the other people of, and I still have the petition because I was very proud of it. They had, you know, spendthrift and all that stuff, but on everybody else's petition they said that they were arrogant, and they left that off of mine. Wasn't that nice? So anyway, we were so busy trying to get the city operating, it was, you know, it wasn't a full-time job. We were getting paid $150 a month to cover our, you know, travel expenses and this and that. That was it. But we were really busy. We didn't really organize an opposition to it. And on the day of the election, the folks behind the recall had a little newspaper printed up with all these things, and they went around town at the crack of dawn and dropped it on everybody's doorstep. It was amazing. I had no idea they were going to be. Anyway, so we lost. I got recalled, along with the rest of them. And the next day it rained. And I'll never forget that sensation of going out in the rain with Gene Octor, one of the other guys that got recalled, taking down signs and just wondering what the heck happened.
Right.
So, because nobody knew how hard we were working and what, you know, anyway.
So how did it turn out for them is what I want to know.
Well, you know, there had to be a special election, which of course is expensive, to replace the people that were recalled. And a bunch of them started running, and my phone started ringing, and people were calling me up asking me to run again. And I said, you gotta be nuts. I just got recalled. What are you talking about? And after a while, after a couple of weeks of having people call me up, this sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Thomas, they had some cabins that they rented out near Oak Cove. And she had known me since I was a kid. And she called me up. And she was one of these women you can't say no to. You know what I mean? You're probably the same. She goes, Eddie, what's the matter with you? You gotta get back in there. What? That's crazy. I go, no. Anyway, she wouldn't take no for an answer. And so I said, okay, fine. I'll tell you what. I'll put my name in, but I'm not going to campaign. I'm going to put up 2 signs. One across the street from each of the post offices, the one in Clear Lake Park and the one in Clear Lake Highlands. And that's it. Everybody knows me. They know whether they like me or not. I'm not going to try to convince anybody to vote for me. If they want me, fine. If they don't want me, fine. And I got reelected.
Great story.
Yeah, it's unusual. That's why I'm telling you.
Yeah, that's good.
So, ended up on the city council, and we went through a lot of growing pains, a lot of turmoil, and this and that. But I am happy to say that the city is finally pretty stable. I really like the city manager, Greg Folsom. I think he's doing a great job. And I haven't met the new police chief, but they just hired a new police chief, and everybody thinks he's wonderful. Just hired him a couple of days ago. Yeah, Thursday. Today's Saturday. Okay. So, anyway, that's my
So
city
where do you
story.
live now?
Where do I live now? Well, after 3 terms on the council, 3 terms? I don't know, the recall kind of makes things different. But what I did was I found some land that I really liked on the side of the hill outside of Lower Lake. And so I bought the land, and then while I was running my business in Clear Lake, I had a computer business. I was working on my land, and I got a well drilled, and I found I had water, and then I got electricity. I put a temporary power pole out there. Anyway, to make a long story short, I built my house out there. It took me 5 years. I did it myself. But so I live out on Perini Road, outside of Lower Lake, and I live next to a vineyard. So twice a year I get woken up in the middle of the night by all of these machines, dust and lights, and
Wow.
yeah, it's okay. I just close my windows. But I really like it out there. It's nice and peaceful. Yes.
I was told that Clear Lake is a general law city. Would you explain to us what that is, if that's true, and why there are no districts? We have 5 council members, but there are no districts like there are in other cities.
Yeah, okay, I can do that. There's 2 kinds of cities, general law cities and charter cities. Charter cities are created, are not the normal. Most cities are general law cities. Charter cities are created by the state, I believe. I don't know, because Clear Lake isn't one. But San Francisco is a charter city, for example. And they have their city council members elected by districts. Now, just for your information, when the city first incorporated, we were elected by districts. That was in the original incorporation. There were 5 districts. Okay, I had a 2-year term, so I had to run again after 2 years. That was before the recall. The recall happened during my 2nd term. So I had to run in my district. And what we discovered was that in a town as small as Clear Lake, the districts are really small in terms of voters. You know, you might have 1,000 people in the district, but they're not all voters. You know, and so it didn't take more than like 30 or 40 people to swing the election one way or the other. And we all, those of us on the council who had to deal with this, we all thought, you know, really, we should be representing the city as a whole. And so we put a thing on the ballot and let the voters decide whether they wanted to keep this district thing going or not, and the voters said no. We want the council members elected at large, and that's why it is the way it is.
Thank you for that explanation.
See, that's why they keep me around, because I know all this old stuff.
Yeah, because I remember a few years ago, there was a petition to recall, I believe. And, yeah, in Clear Lake, within the last 10 years. And I know at least one person who was part of that recall. And I asked, why would they want to recall if the city wasn't incorporated and I was incorporated? Why would they want to recall and put it back with the county? To make a long story short, I said, if we had districts, then they wouldn't have to recall all of the commission, the council members. They could only recall the one for that district. But as you just explained, it makes sense if you only have a few voters in a particular district.
Yeah. I'll tell you, after having gone through a recall, I have very strong feelings about it. Let's put it that way. And I don't think that recalls are justified unless there's something, something's
Malfeasance.
done, malfeasance or something
Corruption.
criminal, corrupt, that kind of stuff. It's not just because you don't like the way they voted or something.
Yeah, we recall, or the district recalled Bob Jones.
I
And that's
remember.
how Doc Wilcox became our District 1 supervisor.
That's right.
That was back in like 1982,
Right.
no, 1978.
And I think it had to do with geothermal development.
Might have.
Bob Jones,
Oh, that's
that my next door neighbor, Bob Jones in the village.
The
In the village, yes.
The realtor?
Yeah,
Mhm.
he's our former neighbor, he passed away 5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
His son
I didn't
now
know
lives in the
that.
house,
Yeah,
right
well,
next door to him.
that's the guy.
Yes, because, and the reason I asked is because before he passed away, he cleaned out his basement or whatever, and he had a big sign sitting in the backyard that said, Bob Jones, supervisor. I never knew, but I haven't been here that long.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was on the board of
county
supervisors.
supervisor, and he got me called.
Yes, okay.
Nice guy, I liked it.
Yeah.
How did you get into local government? You said that you had owned a computer business. Were you a business owner who then just had enough influence that you ended up on city council, or were you involved in other ways before that all played out?
Honestly, I don't think the fact that I was a business owner had anything to do with it.
Yeah.
I think, see, here's the reality of the situation. I think it was because I grew up there and a whole bunch of people knew me. And they knew that I was, they knew me, that I was an okay guy, I mean, I was a good student in school. And
Straightforward.
all that stuff. That's why that Mrs. Thomas called me up and said, Eddie, you gotta get this. I mean, okay, here's another Clear Lake story. I didn't know I was gonna be telling all these Clear Lake stories. I saw an article in the Record Bee here a couple of years ago where some new reporter had done a story about the original incorporation of Clear Lake. And they made a mistake. I didn't phone them and tell them about it, but the original election, there was about 20 people that were running for these 5 city council seats.
Wow.
Really?
It's a decent amount.
Hmm?
I said that is a very decent amount, especially since you said it's pretty low population amongst the districts. too.
Right.
That's quite a few people showing.
Anyway, I walked into the auto parts store one day to get an oil filter for my truck, and the guy that owned the store said, "Hey Ed, what do you think about this incorporation?" I said, "Well, I think it's going to pass this time." He goes, "So do I." And he goes, "And I'm kind of bugged because I'm looking at all these names of these people running for the city council and I don't know any of them." And I said, "Well, Dwayne, why don't you run?" It was Dwayne Garner. And he goes, "Well, I'm too busy with my store. Why don't you run?" I said, "Well, I'm too busy too." So that following weekend, I got a call from a guy I went to high school with. And he invited me over to his house on Saturday afternoon to sit out on his deck and have a beer and just talk about stuff. And he suggested that I run also. So I got thinking about it. And so I put my name in. But when the election was over and done with, I came in number 6. I didn't know how to campaign. I didn't really do a regular political campaign. I just put up a couple of signs. But the guy who, there was a fella, I better not say his name. He was an attorney in town. And I'm sure the voters voted for him because when you run, you have to list your occupation and it said attorney. And I imagine they figured having an attorney on the council would be good. He'd be given some free legal advice. And anyway, the problem with this attorney was that he was a real flake. That's why I don't want to say his name, because he had all kinds of people chasing after him that he owed money to. And so when they went to find him to tell him he'd gotten elected, he had left town. He'd run out of town. No
Oh
kidding.
my God, a flake.
And so And so they couldn't find him, and they said, well, you know, if you don't live in the city, then you don't qualify, so then number 6 moved up to be number 5, and that's how I started my political career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no kidding. And anyway, in the newspaper article, they listed the 5 council members that got elected, and I wasn't in the list, it was that other guy.
Oh,
That was they had just gone to the elections office and looked up the original tally. Yeah.
Now, are you currently still chair of the recovery group from the Valley Fire?
No, I did that for a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
But no, the current chair is the fellow that's the bank manager here in Middletown.
Oh, okay.
David Thurber?
Yeah. Yes, Dave Thurber.
Okay, so what was going on or what was happening during the time you were involved in Team Lake County?
You want me to tell the real story?
Yes, the real story.
Of course you do. Because you were there.
Well, part of the time.
She was the secretary when well, here's what happened. There's a thing called a long-term recovery group that you can form after a disaster. And it's a kind of an informal outfit in a way. It's not a nonprofit corporation or anything like that. It's more of a collaboration. But it's made up of faith-based groups, nonprofits, government agencies like FEMA and Cal, Office of Emergency Services, and they get together and try to coordinate assistance of various forms for people who were the survivors of the disaster. And so that's what Team Lake County was. It was formed to help fire survivors. And there was lots of different things that could be done. And these different groups were really interesting in what they were able to provide. And the whole idea was to coordinate services so there wasn't duplication and a lot of waste. It was just helping people. That was what it's for. How am I doing on that? So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Okay. Well, apparently what happened was that during the first year or so of Team Lake County, there was a lot of internal squabbling and power struggles between different groups who wanted to kind of be in control of it. I don't want to point any fingers, but you know, that's really what was going on. And so what happened was the person who had stepped up and was the chair of Team Lake County got really frustrated at being, I don't know what the right adjective is, but just got frustrated by all the fussing and fighting and turmoil and decided to resign. Well, I got a phone call from Kelly Cox and Rob Brown, who said, Ed, listen, they're going to have an election to elect a new chair of this Team Lake County, and there aren't very many real good candidates stepping up for this. It's kind of a mess. You want to get in the middle of a mess? I said, oh, why not? I'm retired. Anyway, actually, that's not what I said. But so I came down to the meeting. Divorce was there, so she's going to keep me honest. I came down to the meeting, and there was one other fellow who had gotten all of his supporters behind him, and he figured he was going to be a shoo-in because he was the only candidate. And I popped up like a mushroom in the cow pasture and said, hey, I want to run too. So we had an election and I won. And the guy was so upset, he demanded a recount, remember?
Yes,
Oh, no,
I do.
really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fighting hard to take care of the mess, apparently.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so really what my job was while I was the chair of Team Lake County was to kind of get things smoothed out, get things functioning, get the money moving. And because there was a lot of different people who had contributed to different funds with banks and other organizations. And we were setting up a process to distribute the money to people that needed, people who were underinsured or uninsured, people that were elderly or disabled and their house got burned down and they were living in a temporary shelter of some sort and they needed help to get it together. And they didn't know how to deal with the county building department. They didn't know how to deal with all these different agencies and bureaucracies and so forth. So that's what we set about to do. And we made some changes to our bylaws and we did a few other things, but we got it working pretty smoothly. And so I decided, you ever see that old TV show called Have Gun Will Travel?
Yeah.
Where they hired this guy named Paladin and he'd come into town and clean it up and then he'd ride away. Well, that was kind of what I did.
I haven't seen that in probably 50 years.
Yeah, well, I'm old.
Richard Boone.
Yeah, Richard Boone. Who remembered that?
Yeah.
Well, that actually started as a radio show.
Is that right? Wow.
It still airs.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
20thCenturyRadio.com.
Wow.
Well,
So what was your involvement in establishing the new senior center in Middletown and the library?
oh, well, I basically raised the money. After I raised the money and I got the county to purchase a piece of land that was across the street from the high school. And we were going to build it there. But then the high school got a grant, or there was a state bond passed. Anyway, they got a bunch of money and they wanted to build their new section of the high school across the street. And they had this property over here that is now the library, the new library, but at the time it was a continuation school. And so what happened was, it worked out kind of neat because I was getting frustrated at how slow things were going. But Jim Comstock, the guy who replaced me on District 1 Supervisors, he had been on the school board. And so he knew all the right people and all the right connections to work out with the county a swap so that the county got that land. I'm pointing, you can't tell on the camera where I'm pointing.
We can take care of that in the editing.
And the school got that. So it was mostly raising the money, and it was kind of interesting because, how am I doing on time?
Oh, so you're about halfway through.
Oh, good, I got more time. This is a great story. This is one of my favorite stories because I get to say nice things about Mike Thompson, our congressman. And Mike Thompson is a good congressman, let me tell you. There was a time when PG&E decided it was getting out of the power generation business. They were going to distribute electricity but not generate it. And so they decided that they were going to sell the power plants that they had built up here in the mountains behind Middletown. Okay. Now, you need to understand that because a lot of the steam fields where the wells are located are on BLM land, which is public land.
Bureau of Land Management.
Right, Bureau of Land Management. There's royalties that get paid, just like if you were pumping oil from an oil well on public lands, they paid royalties to the government. And the federal government sends some of that money back to the state and the county of origin. So the county got money. The money was based on the price of the steam. There were all these companies that had these steam wells and steam fields, and they sold the steam to PG&E. And the royalty was like 10% of the sale price. So everything was nice and simple until PG&E sold its power plants to Calpine and NCPA, which just happened to be the companies that had the steam fields. So now there was no sale. Before there was what in the government rules they called an arm's length transaction. But now that there wasn't, you're basically selling it to yourself, so you weren't really selling it at all. And so our royalties went from, I might be not remembering this correctly, but I think it went from something like $700,000 a year down to $7,000 a year. In other words, they basically disappeared. And that was a big hit to the county. And so I, not knowing any better, I went down to see Kelly Cox, the county administrator. And I said, Kelly, I want to try to get our royalties back. He goes, I don't think you'd be able to. You're dealing with the federal government. I said, yeah, I know. But I want to give it a try. And I want to make a deal with you. This is not an illegal deal, and this is not corruption. This is a good deal. I said, Kelly, we need to build a new senior center and library in Middletown. And there's no way to, I mean, we don't have the money for it. You know, I've been talking about this for a long time. Here's the deal. If I can get our royalties restored, I want that money to go to build a new library and senior center in Middletown. That's the first thing we're going to spend it on. And he said, okay, if you can do that, I will support you. And that's how we got the money. And Mike Thompson was fantastic. I took a ride back to Washington, D.C. And it didn't cost the taxpayers of Lake County a nickel, because there was a fella who was the general manager of the Hidden Valley Community Services District, and he was involved in a nationwide water agency organization called Aqua, the Association, or actually, no, that wasn't Aqua, it was a different one. But anyway, and he was going back to lobby on some of these water district issues. And he called me up and he said, would you like to come back to Washington with me, because having an elected official along helps get you in the door. And I said, sure, I've got a little mission of my own that I want to do back there. So I went back there with him, and then I went and talked to Mike Thompson. And I explained to Mike what was going on. And I'll tell you what, that guy did something that amazed me. You know, I've dealt with a number of state and federal officials, and oftentimes what they'll do is they'll write a letter. That's a normal thing, right, Doris? Mike Thompson wrote a letter, all right, but check this out. He wrote a letter to the MMS, that's the Minerals Management Service. That's a branch of the Department of the Interior, and they handle gas and oil and geothermal. Geothermal is considered to be a mineral, I guess. Anyway, so Mike wrote this letter saying that we needed to take a look at the rules on how they allocate royalties. And he walked it around the floor of Congress and got every single California congressman to sign this letter, and then he went over to the Senate and got Boxer and Feinstein to sign it. And then he sent it to the Department of the Interior. Well, guess what? That got their attention, big time. And they scheduled, I mean, I went back there in like February or March, and by July, the federal government had issued this notice in the Federal Register that they were going to have public hearings on rule changes, and the industry people freaked out. Yeah, it was wild. And so, well, to make a long story short, I had fun because I had the industry people calling me up. I was having lunch over there at the Greenview room in Hidden Valley one afternoon, and my cell phone rang, and it was the MMS in Washington, D.C. saying, we've been talking with all these different agencies, and they tell us you want these new rules to be able to restore your royalties. Well, we've got a plan to do this, but we want to make sure it's okay with you. I couldn't believe it. They're asking me if it's okay with me. Doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. That's great.
So what happened then was we got our royalties restored from Calpine. But NCPA, Northern California Power Association, they're a group made up of a whole bunch of cities and water districts. Ukiah is a member.
Healdsburg, I think.
Healdsburg's a member. A bunch of big water districts out in the valley. Well, they all have boards, and all these boards, they had their own ideas about this, and they didn't want to go along with this. They didn't want to go along with the formula that Calpine did. And so they came up with their own formula. They wanted to pay, I forget what it was, some percentage of the wholesale cost of electricity. Well, do you remember when there was the big energy crisis and the wholesale cost of electricity went from about $200 a kilowatt hour to over $1,000 a kilowatt hour? Well, I got a call from NCPA and they said, guess what? We'd like to do the same formula as Calpine. Because what happened was, it was like this because of the new wholesale price of electricity, it was going to cost them like $1 million. I'm sure my number's not accurate, but it was going to cost them a whole lot more than they thought. So they said, can we do the same thing? And I said, oh, sure. I really felt great about it. That's why I like this story, because it's actually something that I did. And a lot of times, it's frustrating trying to get things done. I just got lucky. But that's how I had $1 million in the bank to build that place before I left office. And then Jim Comstock did the deal to get the land and got the building built.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Yeah.
That was a great story.
It's a beautiful place.
So how many years did you work on that before you left office? Because you left, was it in 2006?
2008,
You left office? 8?
I think.
Because I remember Comstock running for office, and Victoria Brandon running against him. It was Victoria.
Yeah.
She did it the second time, I think. The first time.
Oh, Suzanne LaFavor.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because you endorsed her.
Yeah.
Assuming that.
Well, anyway, I'd like to talk a little bit, if I might, about the Dollar General store issue in Middletown, because that's been a controversial issue now going on 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I'd just like to explain, it's kind of a sad story because it hasn't been handled very well, in my opinion, by the county. And the community is divided. And it could have been done a lot more smoothly and a lot better. And it's still going on.
But aren't they getting ready to build one in Lakeport? Yes. It's right there.
Okay, let me explain. Dollar General is a company in Texas that builds small chain stores, I guess you'd call them. They're like miniature Walmarts, only they have a completely different business model. Walmart wants to build a giant store and have people drive for 20 miles to get there. Dollar General wants to build a bunch of small stores where people don't have to drive more than 7 minutes to get there. That's what they said at the hearing that I attended in Lakeport. And so instead of having like a big box store with 100,000 square feet, they'll build 100 little stores, or well, 10 little stores at 1,000 or 10,000 square feet. I don't know if my math's right, but you get the idea?
Because right now they have one in the Clear Lake Oaks, in Nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Those are the only 2 that I'm aware of, and then they got one approved for the city of Lakeport.
Lakeport approved one.
Has Clear Lake approved one?
No.
They haven't proposed one for Clear Lake?
Not yet.
Riviera's turned one down as
Right.
well.
Well, let me talk about that, because Kelsey, they tried for one in Kelseyville, and
Across from the high school.
the Kelseyville folks didn't like it, and there's a thing on the Board of Supervisors. It's a courtesy thing, and it makes sense. If you're a member of the Board of Supervisors representing a district, and something's going on in your district that you really like, you want the other board members to support it too, right? And of course, the other board members, if they have something going on in their district, they want your support for this, whatever it is. So it's a common thing that if a project comes along and the supervisor in the district supports it, then the other board members will support it. That's just kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. But, and so in the case of Kelseyville and the Riviera, the people around there didn't want it, and the supervisor from that district said, I'm not going for this, and the board went along with it and denied their application. Now, Moak, who's a wonderful guy, when he ran for office, he said, I'm pro-business and I'm going to support out any business that comes along. And he's trying to be true to his campaign promise.
And so did Jim Comstock. Jim Comstock also supported Dollar General.
That's right, okay. So anyway, I'm just saying, I'm not saying anything bad about these people, but for over 20 years, it might be close to 30 years now, I don't know, Boris, help me remember, the county decided that, the state of California requires all counties to have a general plan of development. It's kind of a blueprint for future growth for the next 10 or 20 years.
Over 30, because the county got sued for the unzoned land.
Right, right.
And that was before I went on the board in '84.
That's right. The county used to have a zone called U, undesignated. Kind of like the Wild West.
Middle of nowhere? Yeah.
Well, many times it wasn't the middle of
Really?
nowhere. They just didn't zone
Gotcha.
pieces of property
Right.
because there are people who owned it who said, I don't want a zoning because if I want to sell it or develop it, I'll have to figure out what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do with it yet. So they left it as a U. And then they got sued.
Right, because zoning is an important thing. If you buy a piece of property and it's zoned residential, you can rely on the fact that nobody's going to put a hog farm next door to you.
Or vice versa, right?
Yeah, or a commercial business that has a lot of traffic or noise or lights or whatever. So, they have commercial zones where commercial development goes and residential zones and so on and so forth. So it really is a protection for people's property rights. But anyway, so what the county decided to do, though, was we have all these little towns, and each of these towns has their own distinct personality and kind of their own culture and history. And so the county decided to create what we call area plans. And an area plan has a boundary. It's kind of like a city limit. And so Middletown has an area plan, Kelseyville has an area plan, the Riviera has an area plan, Cobb has an area plan, Lower Lake has an area plan, and you go around the county, all these little areas have area plans. And the area plans took years to develop. There was all kinds of public hearings. There was a big committee of local citizens.
On each one.
On each one. I served on the very first area plan committee, and then later on when I was supervisor, I started an update of the Middletown area plan, which was completed after I left. But Middletown's area plan is different than the other county area plans. Middletown's area plan, the people, and I remember this distinctly, and you probably do too, the people that came to the hearings and the people that were part of the committee, they all said, Middletown's the gateway to Lake County. We're special, and we want rules like Calistoga and St. Helena. Calistoga and St. Helena have rules that discourage the development of chain stores. Okay? You don't see a McDonald's or a Burger King if you go to Calistoga, do you? So, but when you write rules, you can't just say no. What you have to do is say it like this. You say, we, and this is, if you look in the Middletown area plan, you'll see this kind of language. Middletown area plan discourages development of chain stores and franchise stores. However, if you want to do that, then here's what you're going to have to do, and they give them a bunch of hoops to jump through. You have to design it a certain way so that it fits in with the existing architecture. You have to have colors that blend in with the existing town. You have to do this and that. And so that's the way it is. Well, Dollar General comes along and they say, we want to put a store down here between Store 24 and Butts Canyon Road on that triangular piece of property there across from the school. And they wanted to put a 9,000 square foot store, which is their standard size, and they wanted to make it look like a standard Dollar General. I don't know if you know, they have many different
Facades.
designs, but their standard one is it's a metal building with a big yellow sign
The yellow.
that says Dollar General. Anyway, so the folks in Middletown said, wait a minute, we don't like this. This doesn't fit our plan. And Mook goes, I don't care, I like it, I'm for business, and that's what I ran on, and that's what I'm going to support. Okay, good for you, man. You're a man of integrity. However, you can't just ignore the rules. The county board of supervisors adopted this area plan. And you can't adopt a set of rules and then just pretend they don't exist. So there's a process you have to go through. And they did the process, in my opinion, bass-backwards. Because ordinarily, what you would do is the person submits their plans, and then you would take a look at them and see if it fits the design. And if it doesn't, then you would say, here's the area plan, you need to do it according to the design requirements, and submit your design, and when you get it so it fits, then come back to us. And then we'll decide whether to approve it or not. Well, here's what the Board of Supervisors did. The Board of Supervisors, on a 3-2 vote, voted to approve their application, subject to sending it back to the Planning Commission for design review. That's why I'm saying they put the cart before the horse, because they should have done all that first before they made their decision to approve it. And I know that the other supervisors must have approved it because Mo wanted it. And that, you know, that's a mistake, in my opinion. That's not the way it should work. Okay, so what happened was it went to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission denied it. They said this design sucks. And so they appealed it to the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors sent it back to the Planning Commission. And because by then there'd been an election, and there was another couple of supervisors and new planning commissioners, and the new planning commissioners voted unanimously against it too. Because they're not politicians, they're just people that are looking at the rules and they're looking at the design, and they made the right decision. Okay? Well, so the problem, the fly in the ointment was that the zoning on that parcel says that it's a commercial zone, 7,000 square foot maximum.
Oh, gosh.
So there was not only the design issue, but the size issue. So after they got shot down, Dollar General went back to the drawing board and has come back now with a 7,000 square foot one. And they're trying to push that through as we speak. There's a comment period. The comment period is up July 31st. If you have any thoughts on the subject.
Have they changed the design of the building?
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
Well, I went to the Middletown area town hall meeting Thursday night.
Oh, yeah, I meant to.
And I got so upset, I left the meeting before it was over because I thought I was going to blow a gasket. I really, and you know me, I'm pretty cool, right? I'm mellow, you know, peace, love, and harmony. I'm from the 60s. But I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They had a discussion of the new Hardester's store. And Ross Hardister was there, and he showed a picture. In fact, gave me one. And they had big ones on the wall, but he showed a picture of his plan for rebuilding the store. And he said, we told our architect to look at the Middletown area plan and make sure it conformed to the area plan requirements completely. And look at it, it's beautiful.
Very beautiful.
It's 2 stories, it's about the same height as the Boar's Breath, that stone
That
building.
block, it's similar to that block.
And it's got windows, you know, you see these Dollar Generals, they don't have windows.
No windows, yeah.
And anyway, it's pretty cool, huh? So, then the PG&E guy made a presentation about what they're doing to help prevent fires. They're cutting down all the trees in their right-of-way and a few other things. But then Dollar General was on the agenda, and the chairman of the math started the meeting by starting that topic by saying, now I want everybody to know that we're not here to oppose or support the Dollar General because it's a done deal. It's already going through the county, and all we're here to do tonight is to see if we want to make any comments. And I thought to myself, that's just plain craziness. And like I said, I'm a mellow guy. So I sat there listening to this stuff for a while, and finally I thought I was going to blow a gasket, and I left.
3 minutes.
Huh? 3 minutes?
You got 3 minutes.
I got 3 minutes, okay. But I'm just saying that I think the county is making a big mistake. I understand that the county is really desperate for money right now. They lost tons of revenue because of the fires. They just lost a $2 million wrongful death lawsuit.
Yeah.
And they're really hurting for money. And so anything that comes along that's going to generate a couple of nickels of sales tax is probably looking pretty good to them. But it's not right. It's not good government. It's not proper planning. It doesn't really... What they're saying is, they're saying that they're coming back with a modification of their use permit that they didn't get.
You're talking about this 7,000 square foot building?
Yes.
So they've designed
And
it.
the guy, and the fellow says, we're here to talk, you know, the only thing we can talk about is the design. So somebody goes, well, what's the design? Well, we don't have it.
Yeah, that was so weird.
That was, you were there.
Everybody was like, what's the design? And we had flat, black and white elevations that I can understand it, but a lot of people can't picture that, and people wanted to see it in the...
Well, they didn't
Like
even
an
have that at first.
architectural-
Somebody got on their laptop and got on the internet and found this. I think it might have been the
But
PG&E
there was
guy.
an email that came through with the whole, in the math mailing list. There was an email that came through, and I glanced at it and read the whole thing, but even that wasn't really an architectural rendering. It had labels like, this is going to be brown, this is going to be metal, this is going to be gray.
Well, and Hartster set a high bar with
Yeah,
that,
they really
with that. I mean, especially with such a short amount of time that they've had to come up with that. They did a
People were so
beautiful job.
frustrated because they could not see what it
Visualize.
was going to be like. They didn't understand. And I came to the party late, so I've been in their shoes, but it seems like there were a lot of people there that were there for the first time, and they're saying, well, how come, and brought up a bunch of stuff that we've already kind of been through. But it's just, I agree with you, it's just handled so poorly.
Oh, I know, this is a train wreck.
The communication's been
This is one of the
dismal.
worst meetings I've ever been in my life.
Wow.
I've been in lots of meetings.
Man, I've worked in public government for a long time.
So, anyway,
It's a serious.
there's my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
well, we are truly appreciative
Yeah.
of
Thank
the
you.
history
Yes.
that Ed brings us, as well as his experiences in serving this community for over 40 years. Actually been a public servant, as well as being a college professor. I mean, he taught at Mendocino College. Didn't I take your
Yeah, I
class
taught
over there?
for both Yuba College before it changed into what it is now.
Woodland,
Yeah.
Clear Lake Community College.
I taught classes there, and I taught at Mendocino College too. I taught computer classes because
Oh.
that was what my business
You
was.
said you had a computer business in the 80s. I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Well, I was a computer programmer, and I was developing custom software for water companies, and I had a client that was an airline. But when my son was born 35 years ago, he needed to have the spare bedroom. So I needed to move all my computer stuff somewhere, so I rented a storefront and opened a computer store, and I was doing my programming in the back, and I'd sell a few computers in the front.
Oh, that's cool.
It really was.
Voris was there.
I was. I was there then
Oh,
too.
too bad we're out of time. I got a great Voris story.
Oh, no, that's good. Well, I just want you to know that we had a Friends of Gibson meeting this morning, and we have approved windows into the Civil War for this year, which is the third year we will be doing the Civil War reenactment. It's going to have a much larger educational component. It's going to be November 3rd and 4th. The American Civil War Association is going to come back, and they're going to do presentations for us as well. So hopefully, Ed, you'll join us in November.
November?
Wonderful.
Okay.
I hope everybody comes to it. 'cause
Yes,
it's great.
thank you. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your being with us. Thank you. Hopefully we'll see you next month. There are a number of things going on here at the Gibson in addition to First Friday, which is the extended hours of the Gibson when we have the art walk in Middletown. And we're going to be having a tea party and all kinds of things, doing things on the lawn, which is, I think, the 3rd of August. So please join us again, and feel free to look at the exhibits. And thank you again, Ed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.